In the 1800s, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment." That statement feels even more relevant today as we face an overload of social comparison, unrealistic expectations, and a rapid-fire cancel culture, together proving what society deems as relevant and significant. If identity is who we are, and who we are feels unsafe to be fully expressed because of where we are and who we are around, then who we are only has two responses: conform our convictions or create multiple versions of ourselves. As of 2022, the personality test industry alone was a multi-million-dollar industry, growing at a rate of 10 to 15% each year. To date, there are over 2,500 different personality tests available: Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram, and DISC, just to name a few. These tests are designed to give you better understanding and insight into who you are, why you are, what label you best fit under, and how you are to express yourself so that other people can better understand and interact with you more effectively. So why in a world where we have more access and greater resources than ever before, all designed to deepen our level of self-understanding, are we in what I believe to be the greatest identity crisis our world has ever seen? The reason why is because society's narrative for how we are to understand identity has become completely divergent. I experienced this several years ago when I found out I was pregnant with quadruplets. That's 4 babies at one time. It's okay if you need a minute with that. I still need a minute with that. But it was because of this pregnancy that I was forced to challenge everything I thought I knew about who I was. For so long, I had been the mom of 2, the wife of 1, the founder and CEO of my company, and each of those roles had its own set of rules. I was validated as a mom by the happiness of my children and the acceptance of other moms around me. I got the minivan, even though I wanted the Jeep. We did all the arts and crafts, even though the smell of Play-Doh makes me nauseous, and I'm pretty sure that glitter comes straight from hell. I went as far as to reduce my hours at work, even though I loved being there and was passionate about leading my team. The term mom guilt was used more as a password to get into the cool working moms club than an actual expression of how I felt. For the sake of inclusivity, I neglected my wants and desires in order to conform with whatever society said made me a good mom. And vice versa was true when I was at work. I denied to express the parts about why I loved being a mom. My kids elevated the adventure and the curiosity side of me. They awakened me to the beauty of life without judgment. And they reminded me just how much freedom comes from the silliness of play. But being a good CEO, that means focusing on the bottom line, bringing home the bacon, and using phrases like, "Don't take it personally, it's just business." I juggled the parts well. I showed up in the right role at the right time, wearing the right hat, and I was good. Until I wasn't. Trying to manage 4 teeny tiny babies, plus my other 2 children, my husband, my employees, and my father who had just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Trying to manage all of those individual identities, along with the multiple identities I had created within myself, was no longer an option. Something had to give. And had it not been for the various masks I was wearing, it would have been my sanity. This is when I learned that society is offering up conflicting narratives for how we are to comprehend identity. And it's becoming increasingly difficult to reconcile. Allow me to explain. As we grow up, we naturally begin to question who we are and where we fit into this world. It can be a challenging and confusing time as we often look to society to help us to find ourselves. And since everyone holds a different perspective, we tend to dissociate in order to adopt personal expressions that best meet other people's expectations of us. This results in a fragmented identity. Fragmentation is phase 1 in the identity funnel. And for a while, living this way appears right. I mean, the people around us seem happy, and therefore we feel pretty good. However, as people and circumstances inevitably change, we are forced to encounter the resistance of the impossible task of trying to be everything to everyone at all times. This leaves us feeling unworthy because we're constantly doubting and comparing ourselves, feeling like we're not even good enough to live up to our own standards. This way of thinking wreaks havoc on your mental peace. And when you lack peace, you will once again begin to question who you are and what's your purpose. In order to break free from this cyclical delusion, we must begin to shift how we think about identity. Instead of relying solely on external validation, we must begin to connect with our inner values and strengths, allowing ourselves to view things more clearly. This drives us into phase 2, unification. Unification is where we bring together our once spread too thin, separated being into a harmonious and coherent whole. This allows us to navigate life's challenges with greater resilience and authenticity. The journey to self-discovery is a long, evolving process that eventually leads into integration, phase 3. Integration is where our now unified being operates synergistically in all areas of our life, producing a greater sense of fulfillment and belonging that isn't dependent on external validation. The identity funnel takes us from scattered, emotionally and mentally disconnected, through the process of self-discovery, introspection, and self-acceptance to a new cohesive expression of our most authentic self. You see, I would love to tell you that when I realized that I was just cycling through the fragmentation phase, that my life changed forever. However, I was pretty stubborn. And although I knew things were off and that I wasn't living my best life, I didn't really feel it was bad enough to have to change anything. I thought, surely I can manage. Problem is, once you're made aware of something, it tends to keep showing back up until you pay attention to it. And during this time, my father's Alzheimer's had taken a turn for the worse. At just 63 years old, he still had so much physical strength and energy. He became extremely aggressive and would wander often. My mom was no longer equipped to care for him on her own. So as a family, we decided to put him in a care facility that specialized in Alzheimer's patients. And although this was their area of expertise, they had not yet dealt with such a young patient who had such a broken mind, and he escaped several times because of it. One afternoon, I decided to take a few of my kids up to see their dude. That was my dad's chosen moniker for his grandkids. And when we got there, a nurse pulled me aside and said, "I was told not to tell you this, but your dad escaped this morning and was found several miles down the highway by the mailman, and nobody even knew he was gone." And in that moment, I was frantically going through my identity Rolodex in my head. Like, which version of me should I show up as now? Who would have the best response? Because the leader in me wanted to call an emergency meeting. The mom in me wanted to protect her children from seeing the anger in me come out. The wife in me wanted to call my husband and get his opinion. And the daughter in me just wanted to do whatever it took to help her daddy. So I broke my dad out that afternoon. And in the car on the way home, I called my mom to confess what I had done, because the little girl in me was feeling very overwhelmed with guilt and shame for having broken the rules. I knew I could do a better job of taking care of my dad. I mean, we'd already doubled our family in one fell swoop. What was one more? Surely I could manage. And we ended up having a great afternoon. And that evening after dinner, we were all gathered around watching TV. And the achiever in me was feeling mighty proud of herself. One of my children began to cry. I didn't pay it much attention, as this was a common occurrence with 6 kids. My dad, however, scooped up my son and began squeezing him. Watching his lips turn blue, I yelled, "Dad, what are you doing?" "I have to make the noise stop." And in that moment, it no longer made sense to try and figure out which version of me should show up, who would have the best response. The resistance before me was too great and the time was too short. "Dad, put Walker down now." All of a sudden, my dad softened as he returned to lucid thinking. He lowered my son to the floor and casually went back to watching TV. As I went to grab my son, I began crying as I accepted the fact that I could no longer sacrifice who I was as a mother in order to appear as a good daughter. Because the truth is, being the best daughter meant trusting myself as a mother and honoring all parts of me. So the next morning, I found a lockdown care facility that could take my dad. And he would die just 10 days later. Had I not shown up in the fullest, most authentic version of myself, I would have been consumed with guilt. But because I desired to generate the most loving response possible for all who were involved, no separation was needed, and therefore neither were the masks. And therein lies the paradigm shift. You cannot experience the joy and the peace of having internal validation that comes from the expression of an integrated identity while still looking to other people to approve who you are and how you show up. Authentic representation of your best self demands congruence, not conformance. If I were to add to Emerson's wisdom, I would say to love yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else, challenge your worth, is the only way you can ever truly be yourself. And I know this resolve sounds easy. Oh, just love yourself. However, according to the National Science Foundation, the average person has between 60 and 80,000 thoughts per day. And out of those thoughts, 80% are negative. This often sounds like, I'm doing all the things and I'm doing none of them well. Or, it is what it is. Or perhaps the most common, there's just not enough time in the day. So how is it that these negative thoughts affect our ability to live out of an integrated identity? Well, I've never known love to be the expression of a negative thought. Have you? Science has proven that the experience of love involves a complex interplay of neural and hormonal processes in the brain. And even though the experience of love may be complex, does the choice to love have to be? The greatest lesson that I learned from a disease that disintegrated my father's mental faculties was this: as long as you were able, never take for granted your ability to choose one thought over another. Because if identity is who we are, and understanding who we are begins with a thought in our mind, then it stands to reason the answer is to choose the positive thought over the negative one. And this practice can be as simple as this. Step number 1, recognize that you're having a negative thought. Number 2, take a deep breath. Bring yourself back into the present moment. And number 3, ask yourself, what's a better way to think about this? This slight shift out of a negative thought is truly an act of self-love, and dare I say is required for unifying a once fragmented expression of your identity. Because the truth is, identities were never meant to be managed. They were meant to be merged. It's a new paradigm shift, and believing it is your choice. Thank you.